have. And we need to make sure that we can develop plans that goes hand in hand with the Sustainable Development Goals, but also how we can create trust in the partnerships that we build, and that there is room for long-term investments and the change that needs to happen. We have seen the recent reaffirmation in the adaptation of the Doha Program of Action amongst LDCs, of course, also very needed. And it's now time to announce the 2022 Effective Development Cooperation Summit and really also launch our road towards that summit. We will see a short video, and then I'm really looking forward to hand over the floor to Daniel Mazango, who is the Secretary General of the Ministry of Planning of the Democratic Republic of Congo, to start us off. But first, the video. Let's get started.
In a new era of global challenges, a pandemic, a deepening climate emergency, conflicts, and many economic shocks, we need to strengthen trust at country level and transform the way we work together. Effective partnerships that are country-led, transparent, focused on results, and involving all partners are a catalyst for sustainable impact and will help deliver our long-term development vision for people and the planet. During 12 to 14 December, key stakeholders from all over the world will convene in Geneva, Switzerland to agree to a joint commitment for more action, a new set of practices for better implementation, a renewed way of monitoring for more evidence, a revitalized global partnership for effective development cooperation. Let's flip the script to build sustainable pathways for a just recovery and better future for all.
Thank you so much. And I think this video really sets the tone. Let's develop that pathway. But now we all look forward to listen to the opening remarks of Mr. Mazango, who is the Secretary General of the Ministry of Planning of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Mr. Mazango, the floor is yours.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je vous remercie, Madame la modératrice, pour cette aimable présentation. Très sincère félicitations. Mesdames et messieurs, les participants à ce grand forum, en ma qualité de secrétaire général au ministère du Plan de la République démocratique du Congo, représentant son Excellence M. Christian Mwando Simba Kabulo, ministre d'État, ministre du Plan de la République démocratique du Congo, co-président du Partenariat mondial pour une coopération efficace au service du développement. J'ai l'honneur de m'adresser aujourd'hui sur le partenariat efficace, un sujet très important dans le cadre du Forum des Nations Unies sur le financement du développement, sujet d'importance capitale à notre ère. C'est d'autant plus important que les défis d'aujourd'hui sont complexes et ils ont un impact sur chacun de nous comme jamais auparavant. Vous conviendrez avec moi que nous sommes de plus en plus interconnectés, qu'il s'agisse de la pandémie de COVID-19, du changement climatique, des chocs économiques et des conflits. Toutes ces questions n'épargnent personne où qu'il soit. Ces différents problèmes compromettent la marche vers la réalisation des objectifs de développement durable, les ODD en sigle, dont l'échéance se situe seulement à 8 ans. Les défis que soulèvent ces facteurs confirment davantage que les ressources seules ne suffisent pas pour réaliser des résultats durables de manière efficace et que l'aide publique au développement ne constitue pas une panacée. C'est ainsi que nous avons besoin de plus de partenariats fondés sur des principes et de preuves plus efficaces afin d'optimaliser chaque dollar dépensé et de ne laisser personne de côté. S'assurer que nous travaillons pour l'appropriation des priorités nationales par les pays, la production des résultats durables, les partenariats inclusifs, la transparence et la redevabilité réciproque est la clé pour construire et renforcer la confiance entre les partenaires. Ceci est indispensable dans l'optique de mieux affronter les défis d'aujourd'hui. Mesdames et messieurs, distingués participants à cette grande activité. Dans cette perspective, plusieurs initiatives ont été mises en œuvre par les acteurs de développement pour le meilleur résultat de développement. À titre d'exemple, la République démocratique du Congo a réalisé sa 3e évaluation de la fragilité en 2018 dans 18 provinces au titre du New Deal pour l'engagement dans les États fragiles afin de refléter les aspirations des provinces dans la vision de planification, les politiques et la mobilisation des ressources pour la réalisation des ODD d'ici 2030. De plus, la République démocratique du Congo a développé un tableau de bord accessible de la plateforme de gestion de l'aide et des investissements PGAI en sigle, qui compile des données sur toute la coopération au développement déboursée par secteur ainsi que le statut de financement selon le plan national stratégique de développement, le PNSD en sigle. Cet outil vise à éclairer la prise de décision. Aussi, la République démocratique du Congo se prépare-t-elle pour tenir un dialogue d'action inclusif sur le financement du développement en vue d'une utilisation efficace des ressources de la coopération au développement à travers l'élaboration d'un cadre national intégré de financement. Un deuxième exemple concerne le Honduras, qui a tenu son dialogue d'action en octobre 2021 pour discuter de progrès réalisés par les différents acteurs dans l'alignement entre le plan de développement du pays et les interventions de la coopération internationale en vue de la réalisation de l'agenda national sur les ODD. Un troisième exemple se réfère au Togo, qui a également tenu un dialogue d'action en 2021 pour faire l'état des lieux des progrès réalisés identifier les défis liés à l'efficacité de la coopération afin de s'accorder sur les actions nécessaires à mettre en œuvre pour assurer une coopération efficace. Il a été l'occasion de lancer un appel à l'ensemble des acteurs du développement pour intensifier leurs actions en vue de répondre efficacement aux enjeux et défis de l'atteinte des objectifs de développement durable. Mesdames et messieurs, distingués participants, ces quelques exemples, sans être exhaustifs, illustrent à bien des égards les efforts en cours dans notre pays, dans nos pays, pour utiliser plus d'efficacité et de financement des ressources limitées afin de reconstruire mieux et plus durablement ensemble en ces temps difficiles. Mobiliser les pays, les partenaires au développement, la société civile et le secteur privé à maintenir un dialogue ouvert sur la manière de travailler ensemble est la raison pour laquelle le partenariat mondial organise le prochain sommet de haut niveau sur la coopération efficace au développement qui se tiendra à Genève, en Suisse, du 12 au 14 décembre 2022. À mi-chemin de l'agenda 2030, le sommet est l'occasion de transformer notre façon de travailler ensemble. Les défis d'aujourd'hui l'exigent. Tout en remerciant très sincèrement les participants à cette grande réunion, au nom de son Excellence, Monsieur Christian Mwando Simba Kabulo, ministre d'État, ministre du Plan, nous déclarons ouverte cette session de discussion que, à notre niveau, nous souhaitons fructueuse. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mazango, and thank you, DRC, for co-chairing the Global Partnership. And thank you for laying out this quite troubled road we have ahead of us, but yet also so many examples. And as you were saying, they're not exhaustive, much more to be done and also shared as part of the Global Partnership. And I really enjoyed listening also to the frameworks that you have set up to make cooperation even more effective with that country ownership that is needed to make it sustainable at the end of the day. So thank you so much for getting us started in this good and positive way. And now it is time for us to move over to other key interventions and panelists who will share with us really interesting examples of what an inclusive dialogue actually can bring to the country level, the challenges and opportunities that we see working together. And it is my pleasure to start us off with Ms. Nancy Silva, Sebastian, who is the Director of Policy and Program from the Peruvian International Cooperation Agency. Nancy, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenos días con todos y todas. Haré mi intervención en español. Espero que esto no sea ningún inconveniente. Bueno, en principio, muchas gracias por esta cordial invitación desde la Agencia Peruana de Cooperación Internacional, APSI. Agradecemos a la Alianza Global por esta invitación para participar en este importante evento, en este importante diálogo, el cual sin lugar a dudas representa una magnífica oportunidad para fortalecer la cooperación, renovar la eficacia y las alianzas de cara a contribuir con la recuperación post-COVID-19. Para el Perú no cabe dudas que el actual contexto de la cooperación internacional se encuentra marcado por una coyuntura sin precedentes, derivada de grandes desafíos mundiales como la crisis climática y, por supuesto, la más reciente pandemia de la COVID-19, que viene afectando el crecimiento económico, pero a la vez intensificando las desigualdades y las brechas de desarrollo, que a su vez representa sin lugar a dudas una real amenaza para el logro de la Agenda 2030. Esta nueva era de desafíos globales exige nuevas formas y maneras de cooperar. Por ello, consideramos que deberíamos contemplar al menos dos desafíos. En primer lugar, existe una urgencia por fomentar un nuevo sistema internacional de desarrollo, más inclusivo, integral, basados en cambios en la financiación, cambios en la gobernanza y la asignación de recursos y también herramientas innovadoras de cooperación, incluyendo el aumento de la ayuda oficial al desarrollo. En segundo lugar, y no menos importante, y hoy más que nunca es imprescindible, mejorar la eficacia y la calidad de la cooperación, coadyuvando al logro de resultados tangibles y sostenibles de los proyectos. Esta combinación de más recursos, más innovadores y un cambio en la financiación tiene que ir acompañado de un cambio en la calidad de esta. Si no, como ya lo habían adelantado, no contribuiríamos a un desarrollo sostenible, que es, creo, ahora el gran objetivo para todos nosotros. Esta nueva manera de cooperar implica renovar los compromisos con la agenda de la eficacia. Para ello es necesario que los cooperantes, los países en desarrollo y los diversos actores fortalezcan su cooperación internacional como un instrumento complementario e indispensable para la acción multisectorial, una acción multiactor y una acción multinivel guiada por los 4 principios básicos de la eficacia. El Perú se encuentra comprometida con la agenda de la eficacia desde su adhesión a la Declaración de París en el año 2006, y la cual ha jugado un rol muy importante en la planificación y en la gestión de la cooperación internacional en nuestro país, más cercana y más alineada a las prioridades nacionales. Es por ello que el Perú se ha trazado como principal objetivo consolidar la eficacia de la cooperación internacional de acuerdo a nuestras prioridades nacionales, pero también hacia el logro de la Agenda 2030. Ello implica generar sinergias con los diversos actores del desarrollo y promover modalidades y esquemas más allá de la ayuda oficial al desarrollo, como es la cooperación sur-sur, la cooperación triangular, las alianzas multiactor, entre otros. Cabe justamente destacar que el Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores y APSI se encuentran actualizando su Política Nacional de Cooperación Técnica Internacional, la misma que se va a orientar o que tiene como objetivo principal el fortalecimiento de la eficacia de la cooperación en nuestro país. Para el Perú, la Alianza Global de la Cooperación Eficaz al Desarrollo, con más de 10 años de creación, representa una plataforma global y única para crear, promover y monitorear políticas, acciones y alianzas inclusivas respecto a la eficacia de la cooperación. Justamente en ese sentido, el Perú también en el mes de junio va a realizar su primer diálogo de acción con apoyo de la Alianza Global, orientado a debatir sobre las alianzas multiactor y sobre la participación eficaz de la empresa privada en la cooperación internacional. Esta segunda parte de mi intervención me gustaría destacar algunas acciones y desafíos de cara a la cumbre de la cooperación eficaz al desarrollo desde un país latinoamericano y me tomo esa autorización o ese permiso para plantear estas acciones y desafíos, tanto para la eficacia, pero también para la alianza global. Creo que es necesario renovar el compromiso de la cooperación internacional con los 4 principios de la eficacia. Renovar el compromiso implica pasar del diálogo a la acción. Creo que es importante el diálogo, pero necesitamos acciones concretas. También es importante medir los progresos en la implementación de los principios de la eficacia, ¿sí? Mediante un marco renovado de monitoreo, pero como lo señalo, que plantee acciones concretas para hacer que la cooperación sea eficaz, transparente, alineada, orientada a resultados. Por otro lado, es importante fortalecer la gobernanza y la legitimidad de la Alianza Global como plataforma global que propicie el aprendizaje, el diálogo entre los múltiples actores, pero que también genere cambios de conducta en la cooperación internacional basado en los principios de la eficacia. La Alianza Global debe demostrar principalmente por parte de los países y organismos cooperantes la real dimensión e importancia que se le da a la agenda de la eficacia en su cooperación. Creemos que es necesario poner en práctica los principios de la eficacia, pero en el terreno. La agenda de la Alianza Global debe mantener su esfuerzo por alinearse, confluir y contribuir al logro de la Agenda 2030, pero también a otras agendas globales como es la agenda del financiamiento y por supuesto la agenda internacional del cambio climático. Contribuir y promover un sistema de cooperación internacional participativo, inclusivo y horizontal que integre a todos los actores del desarrollo y que tome en cuenta las brechas estructurales que enfrentan muchos países en desarrollo. Asimismo, consideramos como otro desafío propiciar una nueva forma de comprender y medir el desarrollo, así como un nuevo modelo de relacionamiento con los países de renta media en el marco de la cooperación internacional. Continuar promoviendo espacios de diálogo, intercambio de experiencias y la generación de herramientas innovadoras sobre la cooperación sur-sur y la cooperación triangular a fin de incrementar el apoyo internacional y maximizar el alcance y la contribución de estas modalidades. Y por último, otro desafío, consideramos que es oportuno desarrollar capacidades de diálogo en materia de cooperación al desarrollo en un marco plural de actores, de apertura, de confianza, respeto y aprendizaje mutuo. Para finalizar mi intervención, consideramos que el principio de no dejar a nadie atrás debe mantenerse como el principal compromiso de la agenda de la Alianza Global. Esto va a permitir seguir avanzando hacia un sistema de cooperación internacional inclusivo e integral, concordante con el fortalecimiento del multilateralismo y en línea con la implementación de la Agenda 2030. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ms. Silva, and for sharing those experiences from Peru. This is the way we can advance, also really looking at the best practices in country. And you were speaking about the importance of having evidence, and I actually had forgot that we were to launch a poll in the beginning of our discussion. So why don't we do that before I invite Mr. Andrew Smith, because we can take a bit of stock also in our own fora here today. And then we will share the results at the end. So please look at the poll question and see what kind of answer you would give to that question. Where are more effective and inclusive partnership most needed? The COVID response, climate finance, socioeconomic recovery, data systems, or gender equality? Or is it really about the system change that we need to find to address all of this at the same time? I don't think it's possible for you to tick all the boxes, but it's definitely possible for us to discuss how to do this, but also how to look at the different flows of finance and how they can be of support to that integrated agenda that needs to be put in place for us to move forward and not in reverse in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, thank you for that. Now it is my pleasure to hand over to Mr. Andrew Smith, who is the Director General of Global Affairs from Canada, and you will also share with us what development partners have done in the current context and with regards to the challenges that we are facing globally and many countries are facing, as we can hear on the call here today. Mr. Smith, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this opportunity to give a bit of a sense of what Canada's been doing in the current context. I think it's great that we have this opportunity today at the Financing for Development Forum to speak about global partnerships for effective development cooperation. You know, one of the key elements of the Busan Principles really is the fact that we need to go beyond official development assistance if we're going to meet the challenges of the 2030 agenda and move towards the SDGs. And I think today we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what that looks like. You know, we have behind us the Busan Principles, we have ADIS, we have now also the Kampala Principles that have been laid out by the GPDC that are really guiding the role of the private sector in the work that we do. And I think that it's, you know, it's fundamental to the work that we do that we recognize the importance of multi-stakeholder partnerships, that this isn't about you know, DAC donors and developing countries on their own, but all of the different partnerships that exist within that broader framework, including the private sector. And I think that, you know, I won't go into too much detail. It's been raised already, but we are living in very difficult times. There's no question. And I think that one of the key ways to address the challenges we face is through a strengthened rules-based multilateral system. And the GPDC is a key component of that. And I think we need to recognize that. And we also need to recognize that our multilateral systems have not necessarily reflected these broader multi-stakeholder partnerships in the past. So there's more that we can do in that context. So just turning then to how we may have been engaging over the last little while as a donor country, I would say that we have taken seriously this issue of multi-stakeholder partnerships and the importance of strengthening the multilateral system in the context of the current pandemic. Canada and Jamaica, in cooperation with the UN Secretary General, led on the Financing for Development in the era of COVID-19 and Beyond initiative. And this was really designed to help frame options for a pandemic recovery and looking at how we could within the UN system bring to the table those member states who aren't typically engaged in questions around financing for development. And I think we did a pretty good job at that. And I think that the discussions that took place through that initiative informed things like the DSSI process in the G20 and the voluntary channeling of special drawing rights or SDRs that were agreed to by the G7. Now, I think, of course, you know, fundamental to an effective multi-stakeholder partnership is trust. And, you know, building that trust really depends on having measurable impact from a donor perspective. You know, why would developing countries put their trust in our investments if we weren't able to generate results? And that works both ways. We need to have good faith partnerships that are transparent and mutually accountable. Now, it's not always easy to build trust, clearly. And I think one way that we are reformulating how we imagine effective development cooperation is through the process of localization. And that really is I think, you know, fundamental to the question of localization is this idea of trust, and that trust expands beyond the donor developing country partnership, but includes civil society, local civil society, local government, the private sector, and all of the partnerships that exist within that broader framework. I think also one thing to note is that ODA, there is pressure on ODA to do more. It's not just a question today of reducing poverty, but we're looking more and more at how ODA can be used to address broader global challenges like climate change and other global public goods. And so I think it's really important that as a donor, we're engaged in these kinds of questions through the GPDC, but also through the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD. So just in conclusion, I would note that, you know, I think stating the obvious, that the GPDC provides that broad coalition. It's a form that we need to be working to strengthen and to make as inclusive as possible. And that we can communicate the results of what we're achieving as donors, as developing countries, and the work that we're doing in partnership with other stakeholders. And finally, we welcome the strong engagement of all stakeholders, especially partner countries in the private sector, in the GPDC's upcoming summit, as well as the policy discussions and monitoring rounds and action dialogues that will follow in 2023. Thank you very much for this opportunity to intervene today.
Thank you so much, and interesting also to hear you stress the importance of recommitting also to the ground rules of the partnership, but doing so in times when we need also to recall that this is not about traditional development cooperation, but really how we can leverage different flows of development finance. And I think we've heard today also in the introductory remarks that the partnership really works also to incentivize also countries to set up frameworks that can help that to happen. UNDP also works closely with a number of member states, an increasing number, and partners on this call also for the integrated national financial frameworks that also works for that same purpose, to set up the frame for effective cooperation in times when needed the most. Now we are moving to another really important actor, the multilateral development banks. And it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Dirk Reinerman, who is the Director, Trust Funds and Partner Relationships and Development Finance Vice President of the World Bank. Mr. Reinerman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for inviting us to this important event. It's a privilege to be part of this august panel, and good day to all of you in your respective time zones. We've heard it from others. We're living in unprecedented times. We're going through at least 3 major crises at the same time: climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic and its fallout, and now the war in Ukraine. A hurricane, as Ulrika called it. Historic amounts of aid are flowing to help address these challenges. And just from the World Bank Group, we're talking of $157 billion between April of 2020 and June of 21 as our, to date, largest crisis response. And just last week, our president announced financing that we expect to carry out over the next 15 months, which should reach an additional $170 billion. That would be our largest set of commitments by the World Bank Group ever, and is a reflection of the complex times that we live in. And this is, of course, just the story of one MDB establishing a trend in crisis financing in the past 2 years. Other MDBs, other donors are also increasing their commitments to address these challenges, and patterns are being set. But as we look forward on how this aid is unfolding, I believe it is equally important to be informed by the trends in the evolution of official financial flows, to see whether we're still adhering to the principles of the global partnership that we have all committed. So at the World Bank, we recently analyzed these trends. We looked back at the last 2 decades in what we called a landscape paper on aid architecture, which we are happy to make available. And I'd just like to share with you the 5 main trends that we found. The first trend is that financial flows to developing countries have grown steadily. And this is largely due to a steady increase in private sector finance over the past 20 years, which of course is great news. The second, among public lenders, the World Bank Group is the largest, followed by China. We're also seeing the emergence of new donors like the BRICS countries, who provide now about 1/5 of global loan financing over the last 10 years. So new actors, or not so new actors anymore. Third, we see an increase in the number of providers of development finance. Between 2000 and 2019, the number of countries and multilateral institutions providing official finance grew by 50%, from 47 to 70. But at the same time, there was a 250% increase in the number of entities and institutions that provide official finance. And that, of course, has a risk of increasing transaction costs at the country level. The fourth trend that we observe is that the volume of funding that donors have not allocated to specific countries increased almost 4 times over the past 2 decades. And this means that there is a growing focus on global and regional public goods, climate, pandemic response, but also to humanitarian aid and to refugees. And finally, 5th, our analysis shows that development activities remain highly fragmented, with the average size of official loans or grants being slashed by 1/3 over the last 20 years. So smaller financing. And this is especially true in social sectors. This takes me to the second question that I was asked to address, which is whether this evolution has changed in a way that aid effectiveness and effective development cooperation principles are considered in the World Bank programs and instruments, and what can be done to improve the effective use of resources. So as financial flows have increased, so too has the proliferation of providers and implementing entities and the fragmentation of development activities, as I mentioned. This has added to the complexity of the global aid architecture and may impact aid effectiveness at the country level. So this is something we need to be concerned about. This is a topic we're currently analyzing, and we plan to publish a new report this summer. But let me give you 2 concrete examples of how we at the bank are addressing fragmentation to improve the use of resources through what we call trust fund and financial intermediary fund reform, which I oversee. And I know that our friends at the UN have embarked on a very similar process. In the last 4 years, we have reorganized more than 500 trust funds, grant programs to 70 larger umbrella programs. Each of these umbrella programs has a common overarching development objective, governance structure, results framework, and reporting arrangements. And with that, this supports a much better strategic alignment and efficiency for the bank, for donors, and for clients. The scale of these umbrella programs allows greater investments in M&E, in results measuring, in improved focus, and conveying an impact for people living in beneficiary countries. So what we're seeing of this reform is a good example of financing partnerships at work that emphasize results, inclusivity, mutual accountability, and ownership, which is so important, as General Mazango reminded us at the beginning. In addition, the World Bank is the trustee for 27 financial intermediary funds. You can think of the Global Environmental Facility, the Green Climate Fund, the Global Fund for HIV/AIDS, Tuberculosis, Malaria, and 24 others. And the reforms here place greater emphasis on the selectivity to ensure that these financial intermediary fund structures are the most fit for purpose. And what we've been doing is, as appropriate, we've been directing proposals to establish new FIFs towards more suitable alternatives, usually existing ones, and thereby minimizing further fragmentation of the aid architecture. And I'm very happy to report that this has been very successful. Since 2017, over the past 5 years, we've been able to avoid the creation of new FIFs and to channel the new funds through existing mechanisms. This means less transaction costs for beneficiary countries downstream, of course. I also want to mention these 2 examples because it shows that we can stop fragmentation or even roll it back if we set our mind to it and if we work closely and deliberately between development partners. So let me conclude by saying, as multiple shocks threaten to set back development gains, now is more important than ever to work together to make the best use of scarce ODA to achieve the best development outcomes. With that, back to you, Ulrika.
Thank you so much, Mr. Reinemann, and it is great to have you here representing the bank and also be able to listen to you as you also share both your insights with regards to this scattered landscape that many countries are facing when it comes to development actors and different flows and funds, but also your efforts then to bring this together. And as you were saying, I think the MDBs, but also the World Bank are multilateral institutions. We have a responsibility to make sure that we can really be of support and that we can revitalize those principles for effective cooperation in these times. So very much also on behalf of UNDP as the Secretariat also for the Global Partnership, looking forward to work closely with you and other colleagues in the MDBs. We will come back to all panelists. I wanted to say as well for some reflections, but before we do that, I look forward also to listen to the perspective from the private sector. And we have with us Ms. Janet Longmore, Business Leaders Caucus member and member of the Digital Opportunity Trust. Ms. Longmore, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ulrika. And it is truly a delight to be here today and to join everyone and to listen to very insightful thoughts and comments during this, as we know, extremely disruptive time. Yes, I am a member, I'm the co-chair of the Business Leaders Caucus of the Global Partnership. And we launched 2 years ago the Compella Principles. I just want to take a little bit of time today to talk about the principles and bring to life a real example of how and why we need to work differently to address the challenges we're facing today. The Compella Principles are a set of 5 mutually reinforcing principles that focus on how to engage the private sector in effective development cooperation. And these principles have multi-stakeholder endorsements, which is quite unique across governments, civil society, the private sector, multilaterals, trade unions, and more. And they align directly with the Global Partnership Principles. And they do include an emphasis on inclusive dialogue to build trust amongst all development actors, including the private sector, and an emphasis on ensuring that the design of our collaborations leave no one behind. And I concur with Nancy's earlier comments that this is a priority for all of us. We need to ensure that we leave no one behind so that the voices of young people, women, the disabled, and more are included and acted on. And over the course of 2021, the Business Leaders Caucus conducted a series of case studies to demonstrate the Compella Principles in action and what we have learned about effective partnering to deliver results and leave no one behind. And also to share these best practices of partnerships that have impact and look to how we can adapt and scale in other countries. And the example I'd like to talk about is the COVID-19 response in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And this was a rapid and innovative initiative designed to provide equitable access to testing and medical advice to vulnerable populations and to address real fears about COVID-19 amongst people. And the partnership was rapidly formed between a social enterprise, a private foundation, and a public hospital with repurposed donor funding. And this demonstrated significant flexibility on the part of the donor, which is a good thing, and to create an innovative triage and testing booth to serve low-income people in nearby rural communities. And over the initial pilot period of 3 months, 14,000 people were screened, over 8,000 free PCR tests were given. The 1,500 people who tested positive were digitally connected to doctors for follow-up advice and care, and residents were educated on symptoms and prevention measures. And the initiative has scaled and is sustainable. It had buy-in from the government, which gave it a greater degree of legitimacy among the public and promoted local ownership. And for the private sector, the model actually demonstrated potential to mobilize larger scale solutions. So in other words, taking the concept of translating science and bringing it to the doors of the people who do not have a lot of money. And I would like to highlight 2 key insights, which I believe are critical in developing trusted partnerships from this case study. First, this was a very open, transparent partnership that followed principled approaches that truly brought out the best in each party. And secondly, this was a situation where strategic thinking with shared empathy for marginalized people brought the partnership together in the first place. And I can't emphasize that last point enough. Shared empathy brought the partnership together. And you know, the power of a crisis, and we have so many in our world today, is that it gives us the opportunity to do things differently and to look carefully at the role that humanity plays in coming together, and how shared empathy and following principled approaches to bring out the best in each party can and does work. And we have multiple examples from these case studies of working differently and best practices that can be scaled and shared across countries. So there's the example of the case study following the Compella Principles. I do want to say a few words, and I was asked to do this on leveraging private sector engagement to boost private investments. And it was interesting to hear from Dirk that more investments are going to developing countries from the private sector, although we do know that actually less than 7% or around 7% of private sector investments go to the lesser developed countries. They are not targeted. And so the GPEDC, and in partnership with Business Call to Action, led a series of dialogues over the past year in numerous countries along the Compella Principles and the Global Partnership Principles. And we heard companies sharing their concern about the lack of basic parameters to share risks smartly, especially when attracting private investments to high-risk areas that may have a limited return on investment. Now, one of the purposes of development partners engaging in partnerships with the private sector is to establish mutual understanding of risks and trust for sharing it. We have numerous examples of partnerships that have worked, and these can be scaled up, particularly when ODA is there to help de-risk the private sector investment. And the fifth Compella principle of leaving no one behind provides a series of tools to help jointly identify, measure, and share risks in different contexts. And I would really encourage people to take a look at this from a learning perspective. So thank you. And again, delight to be here and to share a few of our on-the-ground examples of how we can work differently together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Longmore, and thank you for being an active member in the partnership. And as we've all been saying, we really need those perspectives. And you were partly also answering to the question I was about to ask also to all of you panelists in the end, and that is, what do you wish for if you are to look at one major strategic change for us now to move forward? And I mean, throughout your presentations, you have been presenting ideas how to do this. And this is, of course, very much what the partnership is about, to leverage the best practices, to be able to share them and implement them across countries so that we can get back and flip the script and move forward instead of in reverse. But if I could perhaps then go back to DRC and you, Mr. Mazango, I mean, from your perspective, and you have been introducing a series of action dialogues, what you have learned from them. If you were to say that there's one strategic issue that the partnership should look closer into, Mr. Mazango, what would that be? Over to you. See if we have Mr. Mazango still with us. I believe so.
Oui, je vous remercie, je suis là. Je pense que la question la plus importante, nous pouvons parler en termes de l'alignement sur les priorités nationales. Je crois que ça pourrait être pour nous l'une des questions les plus importantes. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. And of course, as we've mentioned, there was a reason for the partnership to very early on stress the importance of national ownership. And I was also mentioning that this is, I think, from what we know throughout the years, the only way that we can make sure that we can really yield the long-standing and sustainable results that we would want to see. Now, if I ask you, Ms. Sebastian, in the Peruvian context and from what you have seen and also listening also to the presentations here today and what you learned from the partnership, what would be your key action? Over to you.
escucha?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Sí, gracias. Tal vez voy a repetir tres o dos, sobre todo de los desafíos que había señalado con relación a la necesidad de renovar el compromiso de la comunidad internacional con los 4 principios de la eficacia. Y esto implica la aplicación tanto en todos los procesos, en las distintas modalidades de cooperación y también en los distintos actores. Señalaba yo en mi primera intervención que es importante pasar del diálogo al planteamiento de acciones concretas, que sea una señal clara del compromiso que tenemos los distintos actores con relación a la implementación de la eficacia. Lo señalo a título un poco personal porque, digamos, por bastantes años he participado en todo este proceso de la Agenda de la Eficacia y de la Alianza Global. Es muy importante la generación de espacios de diálogo e intercambios de experiencias y de conocimientos, pero creo que de cara a la cumbre y a las expectativas que tenemos como Perú, hace falta el planteamiento de acciones concretas y que estas acciones concretas también sirva de marco para los distintos actores, principalmente para la cooperación internacional, de cara a medir nuestros progresos, ¿no? De medir el progreso en la implementación con los principios de la eficacia. Y por último, me parece importante, pensando en la alianza global, la necesidad de fortalecer su gobernanza y su legitimidad. Lo señalé en mi intervención, la alianza global tiene una característica propia, que es la gran plataforma global única que propicia tanto el aprendizaje como el diálogo entre los múltiples actores, pero todavía creo que hay una tarea pendiente en cuanto a su gobernanza y su legitimidad. Y bueno, ya pensando un poco como un país de renta media y de América Latina, creemos también que desde la Alianza Global se podría jugar un papel importante para contribuir a promover un sistema de cooperación internacional que señalaba yo que debiera de ser un poco más inclusivo, más participativo y horizontal, que tenga como base consideraciones referidas a las brechas estructurales que enfrentan muchos países en desarrollo, entre ellos los países de renta media o renta media alta, ¿no? Sí, eso sería, creo que que considero los principales desafíos para la alianza y pensando en la cumbre también.
Thank you so much for sharing those ideas of how we can make even better use of the alliance. And definitely without legitimacy, we will not make it. But I do think that it's very encouraging to see that there are many examples here from the action dialogues and also other things that are happening in between our important summits that can really also be shared, and that will at the end of the day create that legitimacy, because the partnership also needs to deliver results. And I do think also because of the scattered landscape that we constantly hear about, that it is more needed than ever before. Now, if I turn to you, Mr. Smith, from the Canadian perspective, anything you have heard throughout the presentations here today, or that you would like to stress if we are to get focused on what really needs to be done? Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, of course, the challenges are enormous, and you know, in the short time we have to find that silver bullet is going to be nearly impossible. But what I would say is that one area where we feel that the moment has come is to look at how we more effectively localize our development assistance, and you know, as we have discussions within global affairs around this question of localization, it's very important to acknowledge that the fundamental, the basis of localization really is the aid effectiveness, development effectiveness principles that have informed our work for decades now. But that we are living in a moment where we need to do more to take into consideration feminist approaches, the importance of intersectionality, looking at what it might mean to decolonize aid further, and how we then really strengthen the multi-stakeholder arrangements that we have been working to build through the GPEDC in very practical ways. And I think that these kinds of discussions are ongoing. I think we can do more. I think that as donors, we can do more to promote these kinds of discussions within the Development Assistance Committee, and we can act as donors in particular through multilateral organizations and in our relationship with partner countries to look at what it means now to have a greater localized development cooperation approach. Thanks.
Thank you. From the MDB perspective, Mr. Reinemann, I mean, you also shared some of the actions that you're taking as the World Bank to make it easier for countries also to both access funding, but also to get that overview that is needed to align also funding with national priorities. Any other ideas that you would like to share with us today?
Yeah, thank you. And what I take away is the stress on the interconnectedness, as General Secretary Mazango mentioned it. I think if we needed a reminder, COVID-19 and climate challenge and the challenges of conflict have provided that reminder. What I also take away is that the principles are alive and well, but that we need to adjust them constantly to the situation that we are facing today. The pandemic response, the response to climate change, and of course, overall the SDGs. I really want to emphasize again, and I think all of us have said this in different ways, the importance of respecting country-level ownership and the need to align with country-led development strategies. I think we cannot overemphasize this. All of our analysis shows that this is the most critical thing we must do. And to adapt an old adage, all politics are local. I think all action is local. I've spent the last 10 years of my career in countries in Eastern and Southern Europe and in Africa. And the diversity of local situations is so great that we really need to focus on adapting what we do and applying the principles at the country level. I think if we do that and we constantly align, then I think we have a good chance of being successful.
Thank you. Yes, once again, stressing the importance of the local and national ownership and alignment with priorities to make the results sustainable. From the private sector, Ms. Longmore, you also shared some compelling examples also from what you and we have been able to do through partnerships throughout COVID. Anything else that you would like to stress also, given that at the end of the day, I mean, ODA can only do so much. We can de-risk, as you were mentioning, we can support an enabling environment for those investments to come where they should. But how should that be done, if you are to give some more examples of that?
Well, thank you. And actually, there's been some really important comments made in this summary. And I have to think about the poll that was asked, and we don't have the answers yet, but Ulrika, what you talked about in terms of systems change. And part of that is, as I said earlier, crisis gives us the opportunity to think differently and approach collaborations and financing with a mindset that we are going to look differently at this. And systems change, which I believe deeply is what is needed as part of that thinking differently, does engage the local people. That's the only way we're going to drive it and make it sustainable. So it builds on what Dirk said and on what Andrew has said as well. So I put it down to how we as humanity are coming together at these times of crisis and think differently with an open mindset.
Thank you, Janet. And I think that this is actually what the Sustainable Development Goals invited us to do from the very beginning, to look at how economic development becomes sustainable when we look at the dimensions of social sustainability and environmental sustainability. So this is really something that we have to find answers to and really find ways of working with system solutions. And let us then have a look at the result of the poll and see how people prioritized. We see socioeconomic recovery at the top, of course. I don't think anyone of us on this call would be surprised. As we know, the situation is really dire, and it's also now being affected by the war also in Ukraine, and also the looming debt crisis that accompanies many countries having a real difficulty to find that fiscal space to do the investments needed to move beyond the socioeconomic crisis that has evolved throughout the past years. Of course, climate finance, because it is an increasing financial flow, and how that then could serve also the socioeconomic recovery. I mean, how could we find ways of integrating the solutions that needs to be in place, both for adaptation and mitigation, into what is a socioeconomic recovery agenda? And then we, of course, also had some of us answering that it is also important to still look at the investments in the health systems and so on. Whatever we do, I mean, at the end of the day, and I think that this is what has been mentioned most time, we need to be of support to localization. We need to work at the really local level with municipalities, with the local private sector actors, with civil society, as was mentioned also by Canada, and with an intersectional approach to this, putting people at the forefront and at the heart of our action. But also, of course, supporting countries in their national planning, and support countries to share their best practices with regards to this. And this is, of course, why I have felt very encouraged that we have been able also to accompany some of the action dialogues that have taken place now. Because I think if we can make use of the partnership to look at different political economies and scale action through best practices, even though each and every setting is different, that's also perhaps the best way for us to get back on track and move forward instead of in reverse. And this is, of course, why the partnership can play a really important role if we can share those best practices. Now, we have mentioned that we all also look forward to the high-level meeting in Switzerland, and it is my pleasure also now to hand over to Mr. Thomas Gass from the Agency of Swiss Development Cooperation to highlight the role of Switzerland, but most of all also how you will also enable this wide range of actors also to prepare for and make sure that we can see some bold political commitments also coming in the upcoming meeting, and see that the political will that we have heard and interest that we've heard in this conversation today is also something that becomes a recommitment at the highest level. So the road towards the summit needs to be a road that we walk, all of us that are engaged actors, but we want to bring others along. So Thomas, over to you, and let's hear some closing remarks also from you.
Thank you, Ulrike, and good day to all of you. It's really very encouraging to hear what I've just been hearing. I'm joining you here from the Swiss mission to the United Nations in New York, where obviously the FFD forum is taking place. And I think that the title of today's discussion is actually putting forward one of our key challenges. I mean, there's this expression, you know, follow the money. And somewhere we need to check that our principles are also applying when we're talking about financial flows. Financial flows, as Andrew Smith reminded us, that need to go well beyond ODA. And so I really think that we've opened through this discussion a very crucial issue that's going to be with us in this road now to the December summit. But you have all also pointed to other crucial issues, and I was really heartened to hear that throughout the interventions today, we heard about the importance of inclusion. And that is interesting because I want to quote one of the colleagues in the chat, Peter Omondi, a little bit higher in the chat, wrote, "Crises make people think differently." And I think that's so true. And we need maybe to think what that actually means for us. In terms of the development cooperation, we've been chasing after one emergency after the other over these last 2-3 years. And we've worked differently. And this crisis has brought out in us as an international community some of this empathy that Janet Longworth spoke about, some of the strengths and the reactivity and also the flexibility. I mean, the World Bank, the speed with which funds were reoriented. But at the same time, let's be honest, we've also not been good at working together. And sometimes this willingness to coordinate, the willingness to include stakeholders at the local level, the readiness to localize development cooperation, as many of you have said, has actually been rather weak, I would say, over the last 2-3 years. And so this crisis, these overlapping crises are actually a setting that make it so crucial that we come together and speak about the how of development cooperation. And this is what it's going to be all about from the 12th to the 14th December in Geneva. And of course, that is just, let's say, one milestone that is there to serve us to come to a shared commitment, as also Nancy Silvia was saying, you know, a shared commitment to move from dialogue to actual actions. But this road to that summit and this commitment has to start now. I mean, we're here in New York for the Financing for Development Forum. There is going to be a high-level political forum later in July. There's the UNGA. There are different meetings in the MDBs. There are the action dialogues that we heard about in Honduras, in the RDC. Otherwise, these are all spaces where we can refocus on the how and remind ourselves that if we really want to make sure that that our resources that are limited actually solve the dilemma of being on the one side efficient and optimized. I think it's Secretary General Mazango who said that our resources have to be optimized, and yet we have to leave no one behind. I mean, that is a contradiction in terms. And these are some of the challenges that we have to deal with. So I don't think we have an easy task ahead of us. We've distributed some core messages on behalf of the co-chairs of the partnership, and we are over the next month going to establish a draft outcome document that we want really short and focused on substance. But we also don't want to forget, and Nancy Silvia mentioned it, that some of the functioning of the partnership need to be improved. And so those are being addressed right now by some working groups, and we will put those also on the table as we approach the summit in December. So that coming out of this year, we have a reinvigorated commitment to action and a readiness and determination by the international community to look at the how of the development cooperation and to make sure that we also play our role. So crucial at this time of emergencies to look at the long term and to look at what it takes to actually really leave no one behind and to make a difference. So thank you all for what you do to make sure that these principles are highlighted in all these international events and are actually part of our DNA. I would say, as an international community. Thank you so much, Ulrika and all of you. And I really look forward to the next months in preparing the summit.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and thank you to all of you, of course, the co-chairs of the partnerships, the panelists in this event, all of you who have actively also participated in the chat and that are part of the partnership. And indeed, Thomas, I think the partnership has always been about answering that question, how? And I think many politicians, north, south, east, west, ask themselves right now, how can we become more effective? But maybe they are not fully aware about the partnership and what the partnership can bring with regards to both experience, but also foresight in a world that keeps evolving and changing in a way that we cannot foresee. We know that the key principles of the partnership, and we've said so today as well, are important to make what we do more effective. But we also know that we need to find new ways of addressing these challenging issues, and that we need to do it together across the variety of actors that have also participated in the call here today. So it's been a pleasure, and also on behalf then of UNDP hosting the Secretariat for the Partnership, to listen to all of you and to know that there are solutions out there, that we continue to work in between meetings to make them a reality, and that we can bring these best practices and ideas to the meetings to incentivize more actors, more countries to make full use of the partnership in times when needed the most. So thank you to all of you. I want to encourage you also to go to the website of the partnership. You will find a lot of information on the website and contacts also if you have more questions as participants, or also ideas how we can also make the partnership at the service of people, countries that we are there to serve, and the international communities in times of global challenges that we haven't seen before. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, whether it's afternoon or morning, like here in New York. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je suis très, très content d'avoir passé un bon moment d'échange et de discussion très importante au sujet du partenariat mondial pour le développement. Et nous sommes très ravis. Travaillons ensemble, cheminons tous, voyons tous dans la même direction pour atteindre les objectifs de développement durable. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thanks to you, and thanks for opening up the important dialogue and for having also very concrete examples. So looking forward to continue. Thanks, everyone, for the panelists.